So something wacky and kind of tragic happened. It's quite unfortunate. So Zelensky, you've probably heard of him, visited Canada, the Canadian Parliament, and unbeknownst to Zelensky, a Canadian official brought forward another person to sort of share in the revelry a Ukrainian, for a moment of national celebration, the strength and heroism and bravery of another person who long ago fought the Russians. But in what capacity? Here I have a completely unedited video that has not been edited. It has no editing.
We have here in the chamber today a literal Nazi. His name is Yaroslav Hunka, a Waffen SS soldier who pledged allegiance to Hitler, fought against our allies in the Soviet Union, and was complicit in the Holocaust. This man's a criminal. Not a great look for us.
Now, I lied. That's edited. That is edited. So apparently, the official who brought this guy forward, this was done without the knowledge of Zelensky. I believe it was also done without the knowledge of the idiot with the black face. How am I blanking on this? Justin Trudeau. Thank you. And the person who brought this guy forward claims now that he didn't know about the specific history of the veteran. Now, we know for a fact Zelensky didn't know. So a lot of people are using this as an attack on Zelensky. Like, look, he clapped. And look at Zelensky pumping his fist for this Nazi. Zelensky didn't know. He did not know. He was not like he was there and someone else was given a little opening and he clapped along like they did not open. The audio did not actually include saying that he was a Nazi. The veteran was 98 years old, and he was a soldier in the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division, which served under command of the Nazis. So to be clear, no two ways about it, this was a Nazi division. This wasn't some abstracted, like a person knew a person knew a person bullshit. They were just Nazis. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, which of course included Ukraine, and they moved eastward, they spent a lot of time, ingratiating themselves to certain elements of the Ukrainian population. Ukraine did not like the Soviets that much for a variety of reasons, which may or may not have included forced starvation, genocide, constant conflict, and centuries of ethnic disputes. So there were Ukrainians who were so anti-Soviet and so anti-Russian that they would join up with basically anyone who gave them the hope at beating back their Kremlin oppressors, the demons from Moscow. Now, under no circumstances do you have to give it to them. Being angry at the Soviets, as it turns out, is not a good excuse to be a Nazi. And to be clear, they were not just recruited to fight Soviets, they were active participants in the Holocaust. Members of this division and other Ukrainian recruited divisions would assist in rounding up and giving away the locations of Jews, shooting civilians. There's no abstraction here at all. There's a consistent issue here. I don't think that Ukraine is of a particularly Nazi disposition on average. In fact, if you look at their relative lack of anti-Semitism compared to their neighbors, like the least anti-Semitic country in the region, which is interesting, and a bunch of other stuff, the impression that I get is that to Ukraine and many Ukrainians, their relationship with the Nazis is a lot like the relationship that America has with the Confederacy, right? If you go door to door in the South and you ask people, hey, do you think that you should be able to own black people and also kill them if you want because they're property? Basically, no one will say yes. And I don't think anyone would believe internally yes, but say no. Maybe a few, but for the most part, people who have Confederate merch, memorabilia, iconography in the South are doing it in this unacceptably ignorant, cultural pride kind of way. And I think that a kind of lesser version of that is present in Ukraine. A lot of people in the South think of the Confederacy in a sort of abstracted Southern pride way. Are they right to do this? No, not defending it at all. Trust me, okay? But that is how a lot of them think of it. And I think that a lot of people in Ukraine, well, they're not ideologically Nazis, but when they think about, the history of their country and its opposition against Russian tyranny, they often think about it in the context of the resistance they put up during World War II, which was, of course, those Ukrainians who were enlisted to support the Nazis. You understand what I'm talking about? It's a really unfortunate situation because right now the Ukrainians are fighting the Russians, and the Ukrainians are right to be fighting the Russians right now because the Russians invaded them. But the closest historical cultural allegory that Ukrainians have for fighting Russians puts them in direct line with the Nazis, which is why you see like Banderite tendencies in Ukraine, where they're like, Bandera is a hero, but then you look at Bandera's history and it's like, hey, why did you work with the Nazis before fighting against both the Nazis and the Soviets? Hey, and then you have like the Azov thing, right? And we saw, this kind of weird acknowledgement of and sort of tolerance towards stuff like the Azov Battalion, a little less weirdness directed that way than I personally would like. I think a lot of weirdness should be directed at Nazi militias, personally. But it's like, oh, well, it's part of our legacy in fighting against Russia, which is why there's so much overlap, I think, between Nazi iconography and Ukrainian nationalism. In the same way that the South has a huge overlap between racism and like Confederate iconography. There's like a jump over to it, and sometimes the jump is further than is warranted, right? Like you might have people in the South who are pretty racist, but they're not pro-slavery, but they do have Confederate memorabilia. And them having Confederate memorabilia doesn't have nothing to do with them being racist. There's an association, but the racism isn't as far as you might expect if somebody just fully supported the Confederacy. And likewise, at least from what I've seen, there are people in Ukraine who are not Nazis. Maybe they're right-wing nationalists, but they're not Nazis, who nonetheless are weirdly comfortable with Nazi iconography, memorabilia, and history. That's not a defense. I think it's really fucked up. I also think it's complicated, but I think it's a decent explanation for why you have this like juxtaposition where on one hand, they have a Jewish president who is beloved by his population, incredibly low levels of anti-Semitism, right? And they're also a liberal democracy being invaded by a fascist country, Russia. But at the same time, you can't go 2 seconds without seeing some op-ed or some news article where photos are taken of Ukrainian soldiers where they have Soningrad stamped all over their body and their emblems and their patches and so on and so forth. So how do you resolve this juxtaposition? Well, the big one, honestly, is that the people who are most likely to be fighting in Ukraine's army, or at least early on before the conscription really rolled out, were Ukrainian nationalists. And Ukrainian nationalists are culturally predisposed to be more comfortable with Nazis than I think people defending a liberal democracy should be. A lot of them, of course, are literally just Nazis, but it's also more complicated than that. Why did it take Vosh so long to get this discourse? It didn't. I've said this before. I'm just saying it again now. And I think I'm saying it a bit more comprehensively, but I've said this before. I've even gone over those news articles with the soldiers who have suspiciously visible Nazi iconography, and I have talked about it then. So I have not hidden my opinions on any of this. Come on, Vosh, you're more comfortable calling Russia Nazis than swastika fans? I don't know what you mean. I feel like I'm being pretty clear here. Vosh, I live in the South. If you hang a Confederate flag in your yard anywhere in the South, you are consciously supportive of racism and slavery. I grew up around these people. They all know, even if they don't say it out loud all the time. I'm just saying this is a very, very bad comparison you don't want to make. What? That is the comparison that I'm making. No, that's the comparison that I'm making. What you're saying. I said that. What do you mean? What do people listen to me for? I don't even understand. Also worth noting that 7 to 8 million Ukrainians fought in the Red Army against the Nazis during World War II. Collaborators were in the minority. Yeah, of course. Which is why it's so exceptional that they managed to find a Ukrainian veteran who happened to be a part of one. They really had to look for that. If you want to find 98-year-old World War II veterans from Ukraine alive today, you'll probably have an easier time finding ones that fought the Nazis than fought with the Nazis, but they went out of their way to find that one, Yeah, Finland is in a similar position as well with regards to weird Nazi shit. Finland is not a Nazi country, but Finland did fight against the Soviets in World War II in a way that put them heavily aligned with the Nazis at times. And for that reason, even though Finland is, by basically every metric we know of, a very liberal democracy, right? There's like some cultural purging that needs to take place. A lot of it is actual Nazis, and in Finland, and a lot of it is just sort of weird cultural hangovers. It's a problem either way. It's something that should be dealt with. Another good comparison to this, I think, is that did you know that for a time, both Ireland and Gandhi supported Hitler and the Nazis, usually thanks to oppositional politics? See, Ireland and Gandhi both disliked the UK. The UK was one of the nations fighting the Nazis, so both of them thought at varying points, okay, so this Hitler guy, not great, sure, but maybe he'll get the British off our backs. So if you could imagine some kind of like alt timeline or whatever, where the Nazis managed to mount a land invasion against England, and like Ireland came in from the west or something. I don't know. Like you can imagine, like, and then eventually the Nazis lose or whatever. But then you go to Ireland today and you have this like weird cult of Nazi memorabilia from people who are ideologically anything from right-wing nationalists to actual Nazis, and it gets, confusing. It's all confusing. I think it's all bad. My personal political opinion is that swastikas are bad. I don't think they're good. Okay, maybe I misunderstood. It sounded like you were saying they are not consciously racist and consider it ignorantly as part of national heritage. Well, there are absolutely people who use Confederate memorabilia who are not consciously racist. There are plenty that are, absolutely, but there are definitely people who literally just think like, oh, well, the Confederate flag is like a cool emblem of the South, Southern pride, haha. Many of them are still racist, but not consciously racist. I don't like to ascribe that level of like mass disingenuity when the average person, especially the average Southerner, is too stupid to maintain that kind of political pretext. I think that they're not subtle enough to really keep that going. Very important, the speaker came out and said he planned it without checking with Zelensky first. They're in trouble. Anthony Rhoda said the decision to invite a Ukrainian veteran to serve a Nazi military unit was entirely his own. I wish to extend my deepest apologies to Jewish communities in Canada and around the world. That's funny. MR had a strange take about the Ukrainian Nazi thing. No drama today. Vosh people are freaking out here in Canada because the polling for cons are very good. Yeah, Justin Trudeau sucks. Not really surprising. Sorry, every time I hear anything about Justin Trudeau, it's bad. So yeah, I don't know. From Tempest. When I was a young Canadian who first moved to the US, I thought the Confederate flag was just a Southern pride thing. I didn't know anything about the Civil War. Well, to be fair, a lot of Americans don't know much about the Civil War either. I'm pretty sure there are entire states where the education system basically teaches the Civil War with something like, yeah, the North and the South were angry at each other because, like, the North wanted to, like, make everything federal, and then there was a war, and the North won, I guess, but we still have our pride, and that's actually what they're teaching fifth graders or something, I don't know. CDF, I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the differences between the two parties. I just know that Justin Trudeau is like a pretty badly. My main thing with Justin Trudeau was the whole thing from the Canada arc, man, when all my chat got mad at me because Justin Trudeau was like, let me enact my Thanos Infinity Gauntlet, like snap all strikes, all protests away, my giant nuclear button, because a bridge got blocked, the COVID whatever protesters blocked a bridge, and they were like, yeah, time to revoke all civil rights. That was cool. Same liberals that love Starmer. Yeah. He kind of feels like the French prime minister. The French prime minister is worse. France is in a worse position. That guy, holy shit. I swear to God, he's like, that guy is like a machine that turns voter apathy into votes for Le Pen. Macron, that's it. I couldn't believe I forgot. French President Elizabeth Borne is PM. I'm sorry, I meant Macron. I don't know anything about the PM. I apologize. Yeah, fucking Macron. How is Biden somehow the furthest left of the US, UK, and France? Honestly, Canada too. Yeah, maybe I don't know enough about maybe Germany too. Yeah, Biden's significantly better off. This is one of the reasons why I have more hope for this country. This is why this is why you have to be really careful with liberals. If Biden had turned out to be like a Hillary Clinton type person, it would all be ogre.